Thank you so much for joining today. Smart Company, the podcast. We've got really a wonderful show and really two high-powered guests today. You're really in for a treat. First off is Deepak Karpoor from Karagrey. And also we have Robert Bai, CEO and founder of Zenture Partners. We've got these are really high-end, top-notch people in the telecom industry. And of course, as always, my tech expert, Grace Schroeder, is on the call as well. Deepak, let's just kind of start off with you a little bit. What inspired you to found Karagrey, and how do you define its mission today in AI and telco transformation, in the AI and the telco transformation era, would you say?
Thank you, Dave. And wonderful to meet this team. I know we've had many conversations before, but lovely to have this conversation together today. Uh, Karagrey, I'll take a second. 25 years in telco, pretty much all of it at Verizon in the US, supporting global connectivity. That's my background. So from business transformation, strategy, and product. I kind of was looking for a different challenge, a different environment to work in. And I started following where the massive tech investments were happening globally. And I saw there was a lot of excitement in the Middle East. So I went to the Middle East, spent months, 3, 4 months there, started meeting all the key players in that ecosystem to understand what was going on, what the gaps are, if any. And there was one that was just very evident. And there's, as you've seen recently in the news, billions and hundreds of billions of dollars of investments into AIs, chips, models, everything across UAE, Saudi, and the whole Middle East. Now, as I spoke to them and said, hey, how are you getting the people, the places, the things, and other compute environments to dynamically connect to this new intelligence infrastructure that you have? Oh, there wasn't too much going on in that area. People were not really talking about it. So that was the whole core idea around which Karagrey was founded. Right? And it's to say, how do we help them with this dynamic, programmable thing that would allow them to start experimenting with all this new tech that they're putting inside the cloud?
Yep.
Right? That's the whole
This makes a lot of sense because even as we have a low code application platform, we have also embarked on this new mission of, how do you really embed AI to AI communication between applications? How do you put a natural language interface on top of everything that you build? How do you expose all of the agentic workflows in your systems to other agentic workflows? So it is a different thing, that has to be architected in order for it to work well. Because, as software is the same way as network technology, you're riding around on some stuff that worked just fine until something, a new spaceship crashed and then it doesn't. And then you can't actually retrofit. It's a new thing you have to create in order for this to have a glide path versus okay, we band-aided it, and it worked for a while, but until it didn't.
Did you find in the Middle East, you find that kind of a mentality that was much more accepting of dramatic change and not as much calcified thinking as you might come across in more domestic telecom carriers?
So I wouldn't compare the domestic because it's a slightly different environment in both places. In the Middle East, there is phenomenal integrated momentum. Government, investment funds, investment agencies, tech and companies, telcos, utilities across the board. The government has published 2030, 2033 objectives saying, here is how we're looking to diversify our economy. Here is how we're looking to transform our citizen experience, every part of it. And they are encouraging the private enterprise to move fast. And here's what was very interesting to me. And I saw the government move at a pace significantly faster than enterprises in that market. They were setting the pace. So it's a different environment here, right? Because predominantly private enterprise driven. So when it is that way, trying to get a country as big as ours to move, and that's a much smaller market, significantly smaller market. So the dynamics are a little different, but there is a lot of cohesive momentum in that part of the world today.
And what does that mean in terms of like tangible growth for that industry, would you say?
They're looking at doubling, tripling their entire GDP, diversifying across massive verticals. They're investing hardcore tech across the, space, everything, space exploration, medical, biotech, manufacturing, every arena, there's investments going on there. And that is as far as vertical goes. Underlying technology wise, AI is just significantly transforming everything they do, right? And you've probably heard about the billions of dollars of NVIDIA, OpenAI, all those investments that happened earlier this year when our president went to the region. All of that is being mobilized right now.
And would you say, with regards to,
I have a
sure.
question. So we are not taking a whole of government approach to this in the United States today, and they are, right? Do you see an opportunity anywhere to carve out sort of a new breed of service? Because usually what happens, I have seen, is the older companies, they sort of have to work on retention and all that, and then they just buy the newer innovators, right? That to fill their gaps. Do you see something happening in sort of that whole of market approach that is going to be, do you think, driving a need for a new type of service provider or professional services organization like yours that fill those gaps? Because the speed thing is important.
Yes, the speed is extremely important. And and again, I want to make sure I understand your question properly or fully, right? So when you frame that, were you asking me, is that in the Middle East market or in the US? Were you asking if that is required?
So I'm saying that in the Middle East, they do have a whole of government approach. And so
Yeah.
all the things, and in the US, we do not. So they're sort of like, they're not moving as fast. People are going in a lot of different directions. And I know that there's large bodies of service provider organizations like ours, like yours, like Rob's. But I wonder if there's going to be a new breed that is necessary to really take people to the promised land of infusing AI in their workflows. And what does that even look like?
Very interesting question. Okay, thank you for that clarification. So, looking at the maturity of these markets again, right? For one, yeah, the US economy as a whole, significantly more mature, significantly more diversified. And so, compared to that economy, a major portion of it has been natural resource driven, right? Which is why you see a lot of the government stepping in and saying, okay, we cannot organically wait for some things to evolve in the market. We
Yeah,
need to step in and be very purposeful about it, coordinated about it, and they're doing a fantastic job there. Where I see some positive moves, at least in the recent year, is there's a lot of investment happening in the US, which is, I don't know if I could say that it's been driven by the government. It has been supported by the government about massive investments in AI data centers and real estates that are happening in the US as well. You mentioned another thing about professional services kind of capability standing up. Till social media really kicked off, I, I didn't think I'd heard of influencers the way we hear about them today.
yep.
That was a complete social media thing, right? AI is going to similarly see their equivalent of these influencers that are going to help accelerate and magnify the impact of all these AI applications. And I totally see that happening.
Let's talk a
Ken,
little bit about. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
so I was going to ask, right? So you've been in telecom for 25 years, right? And if you look at 25 years ago, clients were getting a T1, right? Like just a 1.5 meg, and it's growing every year, right? And so, what do you believe AI is going to have an impact on the need from a capacity? Do you think it's going to require larger pipes? And for those organizations who quickly want to adopt those AI practices, right? Be it for specific organizations, certain agents, the dependency, if it's going to have this impact on bandwidth requirements, you may have sites that are 6 to 9 months in order you could increase capacity, right? There is not this network as a service where you can just click a button and just go from 100 meg to a gig, right? It could be a year, right? And so you have a CTO who's looking at network as just a pure commodity, like we should be able to dial it up, right? So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
just curious what you think AI is going to have on network capacity from a network capacity planning for the service providers, but also for these enterprise organizations, and how are they going to be able to meet those demands, especially with the investments they're making, right? They're going to make massive investments in AI, but they don't want to be stuck making an investment waiting for a circuit to get turned up 190 days from now.
You kind of touched on, I think, a few very, very important pieces of the architecture, not just the network, the entire enterprise application architecture as well,
Yeah.
right? Because I think a lot of this stems from that. So if we go back 25 years, well, T1s, XR25, everything that they were putting together, they were very centralized app designs, right? You had data centers, big apps designed right there, and everybody just, and it was not very content heavy, right? It was basic text. That was what drove it. And it was not very significant real time kind of engagement that was going on. Now, we already see you have IoT applications, industrial IoT applications, you have mobility-based solutions that are coming in with 5G, already fiber-based solutions that are trying to drive real time. But all of this, the infrastructure is significantly in silos. Now, with AI, as more and more of this application architecture gets distributed, right? You have centralized data as well, where the massive brains are being trained and retrained, and then the actual inferencing happening at edges real time. It can bring in people, places, things, everything dynamically, bring in the rich context and respond to it. So where you're seeing is there are places where there are mega pipes that are going to come by, right? Like what we typically saw in just infrastructure plays, you're going to see in more places now. And they're going to be micro pipes where there are things that are reacting and responding to shorter distance communication, small content data, but very rapid conversations that are going on at scale, right? So you're going to see, or at least a little bit of my conversation in the Middle East when we think about some use cases, smart cities, be it V2X, you are going to see all of this come together.
And I think they sense the opportunity to level the playing field to kind of catch up with some of their larger competitors, because they're more than willing to harness the power of AI and level that playing field and compete without being tied down with, say, like procurement, issues that normally are a big saddle weight on a lot of companies. Harnessing the power of AI. Tell us a bit about what you see for that in terms of how AI really has the ability to dramatically improve efficiencies, would you say?
So I'll unpack that with two layers. One, we have innovation that has kind of been layered one on top of another for about a century,
Yep.
right? So
400 billing systems,
yeah,
200 OSS, BSS. This is a great plan. What could go wrong?
right. So that has a story. It is rich, and in many organizations, you can see fingerprints of that richness being evolving over time. Now that leads to complexity when you're trying to architect these new applications, bringing all of that together. Now, in some other parts of the world, like in the Middle East, you don't have that. They've had the opportunity to come in many years later and say, okay, what does the best of the best in the world inform us? What point can we interject that is best for what we need today and is going to be appropriate for our needs tomorrow? So that has kind of helped them get nimble quicker. And that is kind of simplified in a way. That's a relative term compared to what we may see here with all the complexity that we would have of the legacy. That simplifies the way things, systems can interface with each other, interact with each other, and now that are more integration friendly. We have systems here that are not friendly.
Yeah. They're hostile,
Yes.
actually. They're hostile integration environments.
Yes. Yes. And we've had this conversation before, and we know this. Nothing important is done alone, right? It has to be an ecosystem approach,
Yep, yep,
which means integrations that, Robert, you, Grace, and you, David, have been talking about. That is the most important thing, which
yeah.
is a little easier there.
Well, so you can leapfrog because you sort of stayed out of the fray for so long. And then it's just an easier cleanup. Just like larger platforms are going to have a harder time moving that toward, agentic friendly environments because they've just got same thing. Let's buy a bunch of shit, throw it all together, and layer on some other interfaces. And now what do you have? You have something that's impossible to work with.
Gets a little more complicated that way.
Yeah, but with AI as the coding tools improve to beyond single function applications and simple data entities, it's going to be easier and easier to keep up with technical debt, presumably, right? I mean, there's a whole new management system though around how to create it because we're doing this now, right? How do you create an application where you're embedding AI into the whole process and then there's an outcome, but as you create that, you have to think about, okay, I know I might not use that LLM tomorrow, or I might use a different vector tomorrow, I might use a different RAG technique tomorrow. How do I build something that's not going to fall apart every time I make that change? And the same thing has to happen with network now, as you see the types of changes that are likely. You've got to build something that's adaptable enough that you don't have to rip down 100 circuits every time, you know, ChatGPT throws an update.
Yeah, and I want to add in, as we look at what AI has done, look at the data centers, right? I mean, the average rack was 6 kilowatts of power per rack, right? And we're hitting 70 kilowatts per rack of power, right? So you have what I call as a utility electricity this demand has quadrupled in the last few years. The same is going to happen with connectivity, right? Because of what is all coming in and out. But that's the challenge that we're seeing is, certain, utilities are very easy to move and add and change, right? Power's just kind of consume like a more of a consumption-based model where telecom, it's a lot of facility space. You have a lot of providers who are still grooming networks together. And, Deepak, for you and your experience, I mean, how are you seeing, the legacy telcos or LECs to some of the newer, providers or MSPs out there? How are they leveraging APIs to speed that up, internally as well with that customer interface? Because, we live in this world where we want instant gratification, right? We all have a phone. If we want to look something up, I pull it up, right? No one wants an excuse like, why does it take, so long for us to do certain things when other things can be, done at scale in milliseconds. So I'm just curious to your thoughts there on that piece and what you're seeing over in, UAE versus here.
Certainly. The API one, that's very interesting one, and the one very close to my heart. In the US, what I've seen, at least for the decade, and I speak from my experience at Verizon, leading some of the API work across the retail, wholesale entities, working very closely with the organization which was formerly called MEF and Amplified. They drive the global standards on network as a service, APIs. There has been a lot of engagement, which started with Ethernet about 2 decades ago. MEF helped transform that. How telcos worked with each other. So be it the retail entity buying from wholesale, they started building that around Ethernet. Now, there's been a lot of momentum to start expanding it to other layer 1, layer 2, and layer 3 capabilities. And everybody has their own roadmap. There is progression. And if we were to ask the ecosystem, is it moving at the speed we'd like? Probably not. But there is some momentum on the traditional fiber-based networks. Recently, all of them have also got excited about some of the API work that the Kamara Foundation has been driving based on mobility and 5G. All of them have launched a digital channel to capitalize on some of these through Aduna as well, together. not just the three entities in the US, major mobile providers globally. So I think there is recognition that APIs are absolutely required, wireline, wireless, to make the ecosystem work. And as people move towards AI, and things are going to be, one, reliability is important, performance monitoring is required, and you cannot have humans monitoring AI environments. You need, at some point, AI to be able to monitor it and manage that itself, and even the consumer-facing capabilities to be dynamic, programmable, everything. That recognition is there. The adoption is there. The pace, I think we will see with coming years how the things roll out as well. Just it could be faster. In the Middle East, that is not yet as much as you would see here. There are a few players that have put up their hands saying, oh, okay, we're interested in what Amplify has to say. They're listening on what's going on in the wireline networks. The major players have signed up to be part of the Kamada, whole forum and equation. The amount of APIs that are published, I have not seen that yet. Right? So, but they're watching that space very closely because I think they're now recognizing, AI is our future. And if this is absolutely required for us to make AI successful, they're taking a very close look, and then there will be not too many questions there.
I have another. So we talked about this before, and I'm always, because I've been on the small side in a startup for a while, curious about what the global telecoms outlooks are. Like, how are they making their decisions? Like in the old days, when I was 20 years ago, there was annual capital planning, and I see what Google is doing now, which is like stripping all their budgets and throwing it all into the AI hardware side. And like, where do telecom think they need to be? Where do they think the risks are for them? Obviously you're going to need the bandwidth, but is there a risk for them in this upheaval?
For a few years since the cloud providers got very stable in what they offer with compute storage and their core capabilities and started diversifying into network capabilities, telcos have always been a little, cautious, been watching them very closely, right? Because in our world, we'd always call that co-opetition. We always work very well with the hyperscalers, but they're competitive as well, right? That can only accelerate as AI comes in because the core of what is being built is in the cloud. If the telcos don't step up, help surface the intelligence within the network, because for many, many years, people would treat the pipe, they would look at it as dumb pipes. They're not dumb. There's a lot of intelligence in the pipe. These APIs help surface that intelligence. Telcos hadn't fully invested in that. Now, as hyperscalers lead with API, programmable infrastructure, that is their working model. If they drive that, and they drive the developer relationship, the customer relationships using those APIs, they will win. If telcos are able to take control of that and say, hey, we have a very strong narrative around how we can enable programmable network infrastructure, I think that will be a very interesting ecosystem.
And which of them do you think are most likely to do that first, second, and third? Even if you don't have a name, like which genre?
See,
aggregator versus global versus local income. What?
Yeah. So hyperscalers today, they have the developer's eye today, right? The developer engagement is there. There is a really good case to be made about aggregators, right? That individual telcos, great, but that only works in some situation where a customer is fully embedded in a single telco relationship. That may happen in a small, maybe a regional customer, but once customers go to a particular size, they're always diversified. And if they're in critical industries, they always need diversified infrastructure. So just having a single telco solution may not help them. They may be looking for some person who can aggregate these capabilities across telcos to offer them some of the same experiences. Now, can this aggregating entity be part of a hyperscaler marketplace and offer their capabilities through that to make get the developer eye? Yeah, that could be one way, or the hyperscalers could themselves step in. Either way, I think the final game is who's able to manage the developer relationship.
Let me ask you a quick question. So if you were advising, consulting with a telecom CEO these days, what would be the first AI initiative you would tell them to embark on to increase their competitive advantage, would you say?
Ooh. So I wouldn't have a recommendation of a first initiative, now, because that would depend significantly on, what kind of business they are. Is it a small, government entity somewhere that is trying to improve their, citizen experience on something? Is it, a hospital trying to do something? Is it a bank? And how mature they are, how big they are, how, geographic reach. Some of those things matter. But the most important thing is I would encourage them to not start with the tech. Focus on what is your business. What are you really looking? So if you were to sit in front of your board and you say, this is the most important metric for me, what is it that you're calling out? And now let's figure out what must be true and how these technologies can help accelerate that, magnify that. I would encourage them to start that way. I know there is a lot of talk about AI native businesses. From my experience, probably it's my education that needs to get there. I have not fully comprehended what that means because there is a perception that that is a different business model. To me, a bank is still a bank.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question because Deepak, you and I have spoken about this in the past, but we talk about what the service providers need to do, right? And we can talk about the acquisitions, the mergers, the way they're focusing their investments today. But
Okay.
for the enterprise, right? These global enterprises, I know what I've heard from the hunters that we're dealing with. You were, inside one of those large service providers. What do you believe the enterprise is looking for from those service providers today? Like, what if you were to ask 100 of them, right? What can we deliver to make your experience better, right? What was that missing thing, that missing element that is giving the service providers a 30 for a net promoter score, right? Like, what do you see that from a customer experience that the service providers need to provide that enterprises are really asking for today?
I would unpack that in a few dimensions.
Okay.
It depends on the persona of the customer that I'm talking to. Being a telco entity, historically, most of my conversations have been with the telco buyer of my enterprise. In my big enterprise customers, there's always dedicated departments that are managing their tech infrastructure. And a lot of the times, what they're focused on, when you look at what their metrics are that they're reporting up, it's a lot about cost savings, reducing downtime, being able to manage SLAs. So their applications, whatever they're offering to their customers, are delivering the experience they want to deliver, right? Now, with the evolution, and predominantly, most of my conversations when I've focused on fiber-based assets has been with, and it may be just my conversations that have been with the buyer. There are some organizations on the customer side that I work with where the buyer is dynamically distributing network assets to their customers internally and externally. Right. I'm not going to name names, but there are some logos in Western Europe, some in the US, that do that. And they have always been very keen about being able to monitor their capabilities, the networks that they have, being able to bring networks on demand, be able to modify bandwidth because their customers, internal and externally, need that based on the demands of the day. So there has, in the last 5 years, been a lot more of that. Customers, their business needs are dynamic. That has been there. But historically, and that may be a consequence of the conversation and the persona I've spoken to. In the last 2 years there, I've had the opportunity, based on the kind of work I had been doing, to spend some time with the innovation organizations there. Now, there, the conversations have been a lot about APIs, a lot more, and those are different kinds of APIs. Because in the first category, while we've talked about, whether capabilities are available in the market, what do they cost, can I order them? Right. So it's more the life cycle management of it. In the second set of conversations, it has been about, okay, what intelligence can you give me? Can you help me with, fraud mitigation, identity verification? Can you help me with, is there something else, some signal from the network? And because you as a telco have fixed asset, mobile assets, you got all of this, can you help me make my application more reliable, more secure, differentiated? This is where conversations like slicing come up, quality on demand. Whole bunch of these things start coming up as we talk to the innovators.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, that's our show. I just want to say thank you so much. This is an industry obviously going under, and will continue to go under massive evolutionary changes in the year to come. And I'm so thankful you were all on to talk about it. Definitely some very exciting ones for sure. Deepak, Robert, Grace, thanks so much for joining us. And of course, for those watching at home, thank you for watching Smart Company, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Good day.